Hello everybody and welcome back to DJ Tutorials. This video is going to be on IES light textures and basically how to use them and what they are and all that kind of stuff. Now I have covered this before in some other tutorials, but I want to do a sort of standalone and just sort of show you guys how to basically use this. And what you'll want to do is you'll basically want to just go online. You can find IES light texture packs everywhere, and you may not know what I'm talking about right now, but that's fine. Basically, they are light textures that you can put into Blender or other CGI programs and other render engines as well. And it basically creates a more realistic display of how the light is sort of generated from that object. And you can see some examples here. And this is from leomoon.com. I use this a lot. There's a lot of them that are free. You can download these, I believe, and just get these here. So you can donate or you can get a free download, all kinds of stuff like that from this site here, which is pretty great. But you can also find a whole bunch from a lot of places because a lot of light companies, ones that make light bulbs or lamps or something like that for commercial use, will actually have these available so that you can put them in your interior or whatever the architectural renderings are that you're doing. You can use the actual lights that you plan on buying or the person doing the development plans on buying for that place, so you can make it look very, very realistic with these light textures. So what I'm going to do first here is we're going to just make a really basic lamp, and we're going to attach it to a point of like basically a target point. So I'm going to add a empty here, planes with axes. I'm going to scale it up and move it on the Z to about here in the middle of the monkey head. And we can just kind of move this over a little bit. Just kind of go like this. And then we're going to add a light here, and we're going to add a spot lamp. We'll just move this up over here a little bit. And then over here, we're going to go to the object constraints, and we're going to track to the empty that we created. And I'll just call this lamp target. That'll make it a little bit easier. And we can take our light here and go to the light properties and increase this to, like, let's say 500 for now. And so there's our light. And when we move it around, you can see that it's very easily just tracks along that plane, the planes with axes that we created there, the empty. And we'll just move it right over here like this. And just to make this a little bit easier for our rendering and everything, let's add a camera. And I'm going to move it over here a little bit, hit 0 over here, hit N, go to view, camera to view, and just going to set up a very simple scene. Go to the render properties or the output properties here, render region, so that we get rid of all that background stuff. And let's actually, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to hit period to center just to this object. And I'm actually going to scale this up a bit so that it takes up more of the background and apply the scale, which you can see there after I applied the scale, the bevel kind of messed up a little bit. So I'm just going to increase that amount just like that. So we can see that it's pretty basic, and if you know anything about these lamps, this primitive spot lamp, you can take the radius here, and if you put it at a 0.01, you can see how sharp that line is defined there and the shadow here. And then if you take the power, you can increase that to make it brighter. And then if you take the spot right here, you can make this, let's say 90 degrees, which increases the cone like that. And then the blend here, you can bring this all the way down to make it even softer as far as the edge is concerned. And the radius, you can put this up to like a 1 or something like that, and it just softens everything. Okay, so let's just put this back to a 45, the radius back to a 0.25, and let's just call this kind of like a base, sort of base standpoint for our lamp. Okay, now if we duplicate this with Shift D, right click to set it back where it was, and I'm just going to turn that spot lamp off. I'm going to call this spot lamp IES, okay? And we're going to apply our IES light texture to this object. But before we do that, we have to change it from a spot lamp to a point lamp. What's important to know about IES light textures is when we apply the texture, it's going to go wherever the actual orientation is. So you can see here this blue line, and that's why I use the spot lamp usually when I'm sort of setting this up to make sure that my target is actually being, that the lamp is actually hitting the target that I want it to, whether I'm rotating it or if I'm moving it via a empty. when we apply the texture, it has to, there's basically this texture that's going to orient the light in a specific way. So we need to make sure that it's applied so that the light is angled towards our target. So let's split this here, move this over, and let's go into our shader editor. And what we need to do here with the IES light selected and making sure that we're on the point lamp, either click this button here or you can see this little checkbox, we can use nodes. And this is pretty cool because we can change the color within here and you can increase the strength in here too. So you have a strength here and then this here and it basically multiplies this by each other. So what we want to do here is we want to add the IES light texture. So if we go here to Shift A to add texture, you can see right here there's one called IES texture. Take the factor, put it into the strength. And at first it's going to go pretty crazy. And you can, if you set this to 0, you can see it doesn't do anything. If you set this to 10 or something, it goes nuts, right? So what we need to do is we have to actually tell it what it needs to, use as far as the texture itself. So we need to go to external here because we have external files that we downloaded. And then we're going to go to wherever that is. So IES lights. And you can see that if we go to wherever you have saved or unzipped your IES lights, there's a whole bunch in here. Now, a way to help you out with this, what's really cool is that the Leo moon that I showed you guys, it has a PNG that's associated to the actual IES light texture file. And if you organize this by the name, sort by name, you can get a preview of what that's going to look like. If you get it from somewhere else and you don't have these, you might have to generate your own PNGs to associate with this just to make it a lot easier, or you just have to basically click around and pick the ones that you like. But this is the easiest way. Now, to show you guys very simply how the most obvious way to show you how this works, I'm going to be using this defined spot one right here. So double click on that, and you can see that it's pretty bright. So if we take the power here and we drop it to a 1, now it's a lot softer. And basically what this does is it creates, with the IES light texture, it basically creates a more realistic way that light falls off from, let's say, being inside of a light bulb or the way that a filament might be being used or something like that. It creates a more realistic way because it's not just a linear light that's just applied to an area. It sort of like varies in how the power or the strength is being projected from that point. So to make this a little bit more easy to see, if we take the radius and put this down to 0.01, and let's take this light and let's move it, let's say right here. And if we look really close, and I'm actually going to turn the environment light off just to make it a little bit easier to see, you should be able to see that there's this ring pattern. You can see that there's a darker spot right here, and then it gets a little lighter, and then there's a bright point right here. And you can see there's just this like funky little fall off that happens. And if I pull this up a little bit, or actually let's actually make it a little bit closer, you can see that there's this ring that happens here and right here and right here. So let's increase the strength a bit to a 2 and zoom out, and you can see it a little bit easier there as well. You can see that we have this sort of ring and then a bright point here, and it just sort of slightly falls off as it goes away from that point. So if we were to, let's say, put this above like a spot lamp, okay? And let's just duplicate this, Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to remove this. You don't have to do this, you can just watch what I'm doing here. If I remove this, sorry, not this, but this right here, and change it back to a spot, turn off the IES light, and just call this spot 2. I'll have to bring the power back up because as you can see, it kind of went down, or it disappeared. But you can see there, it's just sort of like flat, okay? It's a really flat light. And it just looks like a regular sort of pool of light. It doesn't really have a lot of character. It doesn't really seem realistic. It seems very, I would say, CG. So if I turn that off and then turn on the IES, you can see that that has a lot more of a natural way of projecting that light. Let's just go back to this IES texture so you can see it looking, what it looks like inside the node editor here. So you can see there that there's this much more natural fall off that happens. So what's really fun that you can do with these is you can create sort of like different effects, or you can use math nodes and all sorts of things like you would normally be able to do these with these nodes, these node graphs in here. So if I take a math node, for example, and I change this to a multiply, I can actually increase how these rings sort of look if I put these into here. You can see there it got really, really bright, so that you'd have to bring this down quite a bit. You know, you could do it over here with power, but if we take this multiply, duplicate it, and multiply it by, say, a 0.1, and change the power over here back to a 1, we can actually adjust this value. So you can see there, I'm basically blowing out the look of this. If it seemed like it was a little bit too, dark or something like that, you can multiply the values and then throw that into your strength node, and then use this power over here to also control the overall power. And some of these act a little bit differently. They all have sort of different reactions to how the texture is actually being applied. So you can see this one here, it's actually a lot softer as far as the overall strength when you first put it in. Let's change this value here to 0.005 or something like that. And you can see that the lights are, the rings are a lot more defined. So if you look in the back over here, you can see that there's these very obvious streaks of light that are sort of like cascading out. And if we move this around, you can see that it's really obvious that there's this light pool with these rings. And if I increase the radius here from a 0.01 to, let's say, a 0.5 or something, you can see that it blurs those lines. So a 0.2 or something like that, you can see that it really does allow you a lot of variance in how you want to project these. If you want it to be really, really obvious with like a 0.0, 1 or something, there you can have that. And if you want it to be a lot more sort of like, soft, you can control that with the radius as well. You can also control the overall strength here by just taking this value and altering this, and then taking this and altering this as well. So you have a lot of ways that you can sort of play with your IES light textures in this way. And what I like to do is sometimes, to make things a little bit easier for me to kind of see how the light is working inside of scene, I will, let's duplicate this actually and move it over here. And I'm going to go over here to the object constraint. I'm just going to remove this and hit Alt R, which should reset the light so that it's pointed straight down. So you can see the light is over here. And if we move it closer and closer to the wall here, you can see how that shape is really working, and how that texture is really being projected into your scene. And the closer you get it to the wall, the tighter it can be at the very, very top, and you can see how it's going to look. And this is how you can basically create your own PNGs. If you put it up like this and you take a snapshot of that, you can save those files that way. But let's just take this and change it to something else. Let's change it to this display one here. So you can see here, if you wanted something really obvious as far as, the direction that that light was going, you might want to do something like this. And just for fun, when you are creating scenes that have the like volumetric light and stuff like that, if we go over here, go to volume, and we're just going to do a volume scatter. We're not going to do an absorption or anything. 0.01 for the density down here. So you can see that that really directs that light straight down. You can really see that cone of light being projected all the way down. And if we increase the density, let's do a 0.025 for example, you can see that wherever you go, it's pretty obvious where that is. Now if we change this to, let's say, this defined one here, you can see that that really looks awesome. You can see the lines that are just like cascading off like this. It's pretty clear how the light is being projected into the scene with this volumetric. Let's increase this even more to a 0.1 or something. And for the light, let's take the radius and change this down to a 0.01. And you can see that it really does become very, very clear that that's going on. So if you want like a really moody atmosphere, or you want to create something that has some more like fun smoky effects or something like that, and you want to clearly define some of the areas that you're lighting up in your scene, this might be the method you want to use instead of using the primitive lights. Now, I will say that it does create a longer render process, but you do get a lot more of a realistic render when you use these IES lights. Now, I'm going to very quickly just move some stuff over into this scene that has some PBR textures and a displacement map and stuff for the background. This thing here. I'm not going to show you guys how to do that because I have a whole bunch of other tutorials that show how to do that sort of thing. But I want to kind of show you what it looks like in a sort of lighting situation when you have it all set up with a scene. Okay, so here we have the scene. I do still have the density here pretty high. So let's kind of move this down to something a little bit lower to like a 0.01 or something. But here we have the scene. I have some point lights here. And these point lights have the IES textures applied. And you can see if we zoom in quite a bit how nice this looks with the overall. Let's actually turn off the density here. Let's put that onto a 0 so you can just kind of see what the scene looks like without that. So this is what the scene looks like. I'll turn one on at a time. So you can see this is my fill light here that I have over on the side. And if you look really closely at the ground, you can see that it's lighter in this area here, and then it gets a little bit darker right here. So the way that this IES light texture is done, it sort of softens a little bit as it gets to the center. And then this one here is my backlight, which I've turned on quite bright, so you can get that really cool you can see here, random walk, subsurface scattering going on here for Suzanne. So you get that really nice effect there. And then let's turn on the key light, which is over here. And if we take a look at that, you can see that it has that, sort of like umbrella effect where you have like this lighter section here, and then it sort of falls off in either direction. So a lot more of a realistic light setup there. Now I'm going to move these over into a new collection, and I'll call these IES lights. And let me bring in a set of lights that are just, using primitives so you can see the difference between the two. So I'm going to turn that off and move those other ones in. Okay, so here we have the scene, and this is just using the regular primitives. And if we just take a look at it really quick, you can see that there's some things that aren't quite the same, and it is very hard to match these. So you have to forgive me for not, wanting to take forever to try and do that. It really does take a lot of time for that, but you'll have to just sort of trust me a little bit and do your own experimentation to check this out. But basically, you can see here that if I start to turn these off, so let's just take a look at the fill light. So here's the fill light. You can see, at least I can, automatically how less lifelike this is. So let me turn these on. These are both the fill lights. So take a look at this, and then we will turn that off and then turn this on. And you may not notice right away, especially if you're not as keen of an eye as like myself who looks at this like all day. But if we turn around here and we just take a look at this from the side, okay, just looking at that right there, and then we turn on this other one, you can see how much more realistic and lifelike this IES texture really is. I mean, the fact that there is that variation in the brightness really does do a lot to create more realism in our scene. So let's then take a look at this backlight here. So here is just I used a spot lamp for this one. It's just a primitive spot. And then let's look at this one. And again, you can just see that because there is more of a variation in that brightness, it just creates a little bit more of a lifelike setup here. And I mean, we can try and just like boost this light here. It just won't have the same effect. So there it is, a little bit more boosted. And then here, there's just a huge difference to me when I look at these two. Okay. And for the key light, here's the primitive, and this is for me the most obvious. We have just this very flat lighting. We have this, spot shape that, just looks it to me, this screams CGI. And someone who's, either a beginner or an intermediate user and just hasn't, learned about how to create good lighting. And then if we turn this one on here, you can see just a huge difference in how that light is projected. It really does look a lot more realistic between the two. So here is that primitive, and then here is with the IES light texture. So to me, it's pretty obvious, especially when you look at it in this way. And when we turn on all of our lights like this, and then we add our ambient light in the background by taking that strength, putting it up a little bit, which allows a little bit of the background to be illuminated a little bit more. And then we put on a little bit of some fog here. Maybe something like, this. You can get some really cool looking stuff. So thanks a lot for watching. Thank you so much to my patrons for your donations. It's very much appreciated. And I will see you all next time on DJ Tutorials.